all for joining. Today we'll be discussing on exploring climate space as regard to finance and technology, the tools for agenda setting. So that will be our topic today. So the comms team, can we project? All right. Thank you, comms team. So as we said, the topic for today is climate finance and technology, the tools for agenda settings. Yes, so that's what we'll be discussing today. So the next slide comes in. So before we begin, I would like to encourage everyone to stay engaged throughout the session, and also feel free to take notes and prepare your questions for an interactive session. Let's go to the next slide, comes in. Okay, so for today's session, our facilitator will be a person of Abbas Agbaje. Please go to the next slide, Comstin. Comstin. Okay. All right. All right. So before proceeding, uh, let's react in the chat box. Let's put in the chat box what we are feeling right now. How are we doing today after the first section? What did you get from the last session we just finished? Yes, just put your response in the chat box. I haven't got any response yet. How was the last session? What did you get from it? Okay, I think I think we got some responses. Okay, Sumefon says framework of the Nigerian climate change. That's good. That's good. Abubakar response was it was a nice session, right? Yes, it was a really nice session. It was eye-opening, it was enlightening. More replies, more response from everyone. More response. I think we had a breakout sessions. This is just one. We had about 2 or 3 groups. All right. No replies. All right. Thank you for the response. Thank you for the response. So we'll move on to today's agenda. I think our facilitator is here. So the topic, as we said, is climate financing and technology, the tools for agenda setting. And our facilitator is in person of Abbas Agbaje. the managing consultant at ImpactCrest. Yes. So Abbas Agbaje is an ESG and impact expert with over 14 years of experience. That's over a decade. Advising multi-million dollar projects across sub-Saharan Africa, including those funded by MDBs and sovereign investment funds. As a managing consultant at ImpactCrest Consulting, Environmental and Social Safeguards Consulting with the Africa Development Bank, he leads advisory work in due diligence, ESG strategy, impact measurements, and management for sectors like manufacturing, agriculture, electric mobility, renewables, and real estate. Mr. Agbaje's previous role include Vice President, ESG and Social Impact at Kuramo Capital, ESG Manager at InfraCredit, Director and Senior ESG Consultant at EBS Advisory Services. He has worked on projects supported by development partners such as Africa Development Bank, World Bank Group, BII, DEG, KfW, Garantsco, Infraco Africa, and AFC. He holds a first-class degree in botany from the University of Lagos, an MSc in Sustainable Environmental Management from the University of Greenwich, and an executive MBA from Quantic School of Business and Technology. Abbas is affiliated with the Institute of Sustainability and Environmental Professionals in UK, IAIA, and Nigeria Environmental Society. He also serves as the technical anchor for the NESG Special Task Force on Climate Change Action. He also regularly teaches ESG and sustainability sessions at the Lagos Business School Sustainability Center, the NGX Academy, Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria, CIBN, and Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you, Mr. Abbas Agbaje. Let's give it up for him. So I'm sure with his profile, you know what to expect from this session. You know what to expect from. It's going to be a great one. So you are welcome, Mr. Abbas Agbaje. Welcome to the Climate Voice Bootcamp this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you confirm you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Can you confirm you can hear me? Right now. Okay. So thank you for the introduction. Is it Samsidin or Abdel Latif? I don't know which of the two is your first name. It's a pleasure to join you all today to speak on climate financing and technology tools for agenda setting. Of course, I don't know the categories of people on the call, but I presume that, we have young, vibrant minds on the call who are looking at Nigeria and, of course, on the continent of Africa. And so what I believe we will be doing this afternoon for the next hour is sort of an exchange of experience, of knowledge, of personal tools and technology that are important in achieving both global and national climate objectives. Now, I'm mindful of time, and so we will get started of what our conversation will center around this afternoon. First, and given that call, I have decided to have some introductions, covering the basics so that we are all aligned in our understanding of concepts and issues. And then, having covered the basic, we will then move on to sort of clarify some concepts so that we share a common understanding about this concept as we go on in our conversation. Aspects relating to climate risk and opportunities, which are really important because without the risks and opportunities, there will be no need to speak around climate finance. And then we come to a matter that beyond just the rhetorics, um, we have to move to the mechanics, right? There has to be that shift from rhetorics to mechanics, and understanding that, actions towards driving climate objectives are crucial, and these are important. And I think this is one of the objectives of you participating in these boot camp is for you to and how you can play a critical role an active role, because many people prefer to speak about issues to spectate. So it's critical for us to look at some of the solutions with what you're already doing, or could also ignite, some ideas in your own minds, or even inspire you to push yourselves, to heights that you never thought were possible. And because we're going to co-learn, we're going to co-create, there will also be opportunity for us to, ask questions, provide comments, and then, share perspectives. So let's start with the introductory aspect as we cover the basics. Climate change, sustainable development. A new phenomenon. It's a natural phenomenon. The climate is meant to change our cycle. And therefore, we must understand that when we talk about climate weather, changes over a shorter time frame, within a day, within minutes, within seconds, the weather can change, But when we talk about climate refers to a long, measurement of changes in temperature, humidity, rainfall patterns. And this happens in shorter time frame, and we have it in the case of weather. It happens different from weather, So it happens over seasons, years, or decades. So the changes in climate are perceptible. They should happen over long-term horizon, right? This pace of change, has dramatically shifted from the natural, phenomenon to the sort of human influenced things. And this is why we have, the concept of climate change as organic or human induced climate change, which is, sort of a departure from the typical natural cycle of climate change that, the biosphere is meant to experience. So we're now seeing a significant variation in average weather conditions. So, you know, climate over time will influence weather condition in the short time frame. However, because of the pace of climate change, we're now seeing a lot of inclemencies with respect to weather conditions. So we are seeing warmer weather, in some regions, it's going to get wetter in other regions, it's going to get drier. When you look at the weather, but we're now seeing that what would normally be a weather condition over a shorter time frame, right? And this is where it becomes a challenge because shorter changing cycles of weather. But when the cycles of temperature, rainfall, drought, and all of these get extended beyond the typical cycle, then it presents a challenge. It disrupts why this issue of climate change presents a challenge for us. In the last how many years now, we've seen that increasingly, year after year, we've seen that the climate has gotten warmer, right? When the climate gets warmer, what happens? A number of effects. We are seeing extreme weather conditions, extreme weather events happening, leading to significant economic losses, right? You would see example of heat waves. We're seeing examples of extreme drought. And where there is extreme drought, it means, there's going to be scarcity of water. Now, when there's scarcity of water, it forces people to migrate from their typical own community to other communities where these resources are present. And what does that? That people have to solve luscious, abundant resources. And therefore, we are now seeing climate-induced. So, which is one example of in Nigeria, when we look at the harder farmers clashes and crises that has bedeviled the country in different parts. I was seeing how it has led to loss of lives, loss of peace and security. So climate change effect is not neutral. We have to appreciate that when we talk about sustainability, there's a concept that we typically speak, the concept of interdependencies and interconnectedness. So it means that you would not think that because a particular effect is being experienced in a spatial environment, in a spatial boundary, that it is going to remain in that same environment. So there's what we call the transboundary or cross-boundary effect, where an impact in a particular locale or community is not restricted there. It's all felt in other places. I mean, take, for example, the Iran war. Even this is not climate change, but it talks about the globalization, the connectedness of our markets, such that because the Strait is in that, across the Strait of Hormuz, supply chain for fuel, crude oil, and the likes has been disrupted. And this has led to rising fuel prices in different countries. So this tells us this is even not a natural phenomenon. This is an artificial phenomenon. Compare that to natural phenomenon, the continuum of whether or not they are also connected by seas, by land, right? And therefore, that area will be felt in other areas. So critically, the point is to say that we and allow, the current situation to persist because it has very ecological and social impact for all of us, whether you contribute to the argument, is that why does Africa have to take any climate action, given that, you know, it's even less than 4%? So why does Africa have to take any action? This is a time when we need to, exploit our own resources to catalyze our own economic growth. And you've had conspiracy theories around, come on, guys, isn't it not just another geopolitics, such that now that we are now, at a position to start exploiting our own resources, they're telling us to leave our resources under the ground and not use it and start to use something else, you know, which will probably slow down our, you know, developmental pace. There's politics and everything. Then we must also understand that climate change is a respecter of no politics. Change in different climes, right? In Africa, go to the region, you see a lot around drought, livestock, dead in droves because of very high heat, high temperature, drought, and this is leading to loss of livelihoods for a lot of families. And these increasingly contribute to the security crisis that we experience on the continent because if people cannot eat, they cannot lead healthy lives, even if it means, to disrupt the peace and well-being of other people. And it's in a bid to address these sort of issues that we have the Sustainable Development Goals, right? There's 17 of them, but again, 16 intrinsic goals that are interconnected, interwoven, such that as you advance in implementing measures to achieve any of the goals, you are, indirectly also contributing to other goals. And this is a critical point for us to, keep in mind. So, and tell us which of the goals speak to climate action. You can either type on the group or speak. Which of the goals speaks to climate action? Anyone? Let's
I
find
think
out. Now,
someone replied in the chat.
we look at the you know, just look at the SG13 and talk about climate action without delving into the entire indigo. We are not so to oh,
Okay. I think there is a break in transmission from our facilitator. So while we wait for him to get back on the meeting, I hope we're paying attention and taking notes and insights from all that's been shared. Okay. All right. All right. So All right, I think he's back. So, host, can you unmute him? All right, he's back.
All right. It's the network. I wish we had a better network. But I can't seem to share my screen now. Could you activate that, please? Maybe I'll just leave my camera on top so that it would not impact on the quality of the internet. Can I share my screen now? No, it's not enabling it here.
Yes, please. You can share your screen.
No, it's telling me sharing is not turned on. The host
Okay,
is not allowing sharing for this meeting. So you
okay,
probably need
you.
to make me a co-host or something, or you activate the
Yes.
sharing.
Okay, yes. We'll do that now in a minute.
It's still the same.
You can try to share the screen now.
No, it's still the same. Still showing sharing is not turned on.
All right. Please just hold on a bit.
Is from the back end.
Hi, Muyo. Are you making co-host? Okay.
Okay, so I can share now. Yeah. Apologies for the break in transmission. It's unavoidable because of the network. So I was speaking to the importance of not just looking at the sustainable development goals at a high level, to drill down to understand what are the key targets, what are the key indicators, right? So you can ask yourself the question, what do you want to really contribute to? Which are the different areas of climate actions that you want to contribute to? And these will mean that you look at, if it is target 13.1, strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate related disaster. So you want to contribute to climate related disaster. Have you seen? I mean, there was a flood in 2022. And I think there was a flood last year that the Mokwa people experienced. Is it last year or this year? That led to very terrible impact on the community in Niger State, right? So this sort of disaster related incident could be the trigger for you to, look at how do you build early warning systems, how do you ensure, only climate resilient infrastructure, are designed and built, So again, you may not focus on disaster. You may also want to focus on policies and planning. Now, if I may ask, let's assume, can I confirm, is everyone on this call, uh, Nigerians? Everyone? Are we all Nigerians? Okay, this is where I expect feedback, or you can type in the chat box. Okay, Nigeria. Okay, so let's take everyone is Nigerian then. Okay, thanks, Samuel, Bernard, and Damsa. Now, if everyone is Nigerian, so again, very quick question: in our state, how many of us are aware of any climate-related policies in our state, and what level of knowledge or exposure awareness do you have in terms of how your state governments are integrating climate change in developmental planning? Anyone? Okay, in Plateau State, not any. Good. Any other state? Has there been any sort of climate, related policies, actions, planning? Okay, in Akwa Ibom there are very good. So we have in Akwa Ibom, we don't have in Plateau, right? So which other state? I'm sure we have different states in the country that are represented here. Or your state, okay? Not any that I'm aware of. Okay, Faiz, good. Any other state? Niger State, any Niger? Okay, Gombe State has, very good. Niger State, you have. Ekiti is working, but not ready yet. Okay, thank you, Larry, for that. Samuel said Gombe State has. Good luck says Niger State. So Niger State, do you have in Niger State, or you just noted that you're from Niger State? Which other state is represented? Are there Osun? Are there Taraba, Benue, Imo, Anambra? Okay, Damsak says that there is in Kaduna, but implementation hasn't been effective. Okay, good. Oh, so we are seeing, I'm seeing the recurrent feedback now that, some states actually have, but implementation is suboptimal, right? Okay, excellent. So that's good. So let's carry on then. So again, we may want to start thinking about, do you want to write policy briefs, right? So that you begin to draw attention. So your policy brief can be sector specific, sector focused, depending on the context of your state. So again, policies and planning. Is your state doing enough in integrating measures, climate change consideration into policies and planning? And so you can look at different sectors and say, oh, agri sector, urban and housing sector, manufacturing, look at different sectors and see whether your state is doing enough in this regard. And if they are not, then it forms a basis for your own, advocacy, awareness. You can write policy brief. You can, focus on participating or driving engagement with your, state environmental ministries, your urban and regional planning ministry. You could even be the one to champion, your state having a focal point on climate change and the likes. So these are some of the things that should inform how you plan your own targeted interventions. Now you can look at target 3 and say, oh, build knowledge and capacity to meet climate change, needs. Again, how much of data do you have with respect to climate impact in your home state, right? And if you want to look beyond your state, you can look at your region. If you want to look beyond region, you can look at the country as a whole. So how do we build knowledge, capacity to meet climate change, challenges? Some people will do advocacy in schools because some people believe that, the same way we're looking at a top-down approach, we can also look at a bottom-up approach. And it starts with creating awareness in communities, where you experience a lot of deforestation. So you may want to raise awareness, where you see a lot of conversion of, mangroves or wetlands for developmental purposes, beachfront housing and the likes. You might want to raise awareness as much as possible when you see, indiscriminate disposal of waste, blocking public drainages, which, maybe driven by poor practices in local markets or individuals within communities. You may want to build knowledge of people, drive, a lot of capacity building in this regard. It could also be, at your state government level. You could look at an international organization that's focused on building climate change capacity, and you can, bridge that private sector or international, actor with your own local stakeholders in your state or in your region, and they can come and provide capacity building to them. I mean, if you get a grant where this can be done for your state government or for your regional government, at no cost to them, they just need to have their own time, have the venue, and things can be done. You build a capacity, targeted outcomes and output from these capacity building sessions, and where, you can also support to drive climate finance, because without that knowledge, your state may be, sort of backward, in terms of trailing other states in terms of driving or mobilizing climate finance to address, existing and potentially emerging climate risks that can bedevil your state or that are currently affecting your state. And then, at the more national level, you have aspects relating to UNFCCC. You see people participating in conference of parties on an annual basis. So you may want to be part of these, right? And the bottom line is that climate action, can take diverse forms, and you just need to understand how well you are positioning yourself to contribute to each of these targets and indicators, rather than just, doing the typical things that everyone does, go and plant trees. How really sustainable are these tree planting? How many people actually track these planted trees to maturity, right? For example, in some economies, in advanced economies, you will hear that a particular psychologist has conducted a study of certain executives or certain children for 20 years and observing them, tracking all of them as they have, gone to different walks of life, and continue to monitor data around them. And this will inform a number of observations, a number of hypotheses, and come with certain insights and conclusions that would be useful, for different purposes. But then, do we have this sort of coordinated approach where, we planted this tree 15 years ago, we planted 1,000 trees 15 years ago? Most people move on almost immediately. And that's because we don't even have, a consolidated registry. So everybody is planting tree. Do we have a consolidated tree planting registry that tracks, you could even devolve these at the regional level, you could devolve these at the state level, and therefore you are tracking, this company said they planted number of trees, then it is entered into a common registry system. The type of tree, the age of the tree, the coordinates where those trees are planted, right? And that is then tracked on a year-to-year basis to see whether these trees actually survive into maturity, because that's the only reason why these trees will grow into carbon sinks. If you just plant trees and take photos and record, we planted this number of trees, we watered it, goodness, this is where we just do a lot of, paparazzi without real tangible outcomes and changes. And this is why we must think beyond just the headlines and focus on things that actually bring lasting impact. Now, let's move on quickly to, clarifying some concepts, right? Because that's important, right? For us to have common understanding about this conversation. So we talk about climate action. Maybe we've heard a lot about climate action. Now, climate action is a broad term. Now, climate action involves two important actions. One is mitigation, then adaptation. Now, the concept of mitigation, refers to any action that is taken by government. Now, look at the categories of stakeholders that have been mentioned here. So when we talk about climate action, it doesn't just have to be government. It can be businesses, it can be people. But two things that you should not forget when we talk about mitigation. Mitigation is about prevention or avoidance and reduction. Okay? So we want to reduce because we released a lot of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, which is what is causing, the atmospheric changes in temperature that we see that the earth is warming up. Now, you take this example. If you are in your car or any confined space and you close all outlets that would allow fresh air to come in, what have you done? You have trapped yourself in a space where there is a certain amount of volume of oxygen present in that environment, right? And then you think about it. Since there is no exchange of air in and out, there's a certain amount of other gases that are also trapped within that same environment with you. Now, don't forget, as humans, what happens when you breathe? You consume oxygen as you breathe, and then releases what? You release what? Carbon dioxide. Over time, you see that the more oxygen you consume, the more you consume oxygen, the more the carbon dioxide you release. So therefore, there is an inverse relationship between the amount of oxygen that will be in that confined space and the amount of carbon dioxide that will be in that confined space. Because as you consume oxygen, the volume of oxygen reduces. As you release carbon dioxide volume increases in that confined space. What happens after some time? You begin to notice heat, right? And that tells you, it's just a miniature, way of telling you the impact of increased CO2, emissions to the atmosphere. Now, not just CO2, not just carbon dioxide, you have water vapor, you have the hydrochlorofluoride, you have the, carbon monoxide, you have methane. So these are other kind of greenhouse gases that leads to global warming, that we experience. But importantly, when we want to mitigate, mitigation is about what? Avoid. How can we prevent further release of CO2 or greenhouse gases to the atmosphere? Or reduce, how can we reduce what is currently existing in the atmosphere, right? And this would mean that we pay attention to how we can enhance carbon sinks. Carbon sinks are medium that allows you to trap carbon, sink, from that word sink, that allows you to trap carbon from the atmosphere or from other sources. So there are natural carbon sinks. Carbon sinks are the trees, for example. They are the oceans, for example. Wetlands or mangrove environment is also a natural carbon sink. But when we, disrupt these natural carbon sinks, they then lose their capacity to retain a lot of the carbon that they have trapped. If you cut down trees, this carbon that was already trapped will now be released. If you use soil in an unsustainable manner, then you also release a lot of soil carbon, right? Carbon is essential for, we have a carbon cycle for a lot of natural processes. But what the challenge is the balance, right? It's the balance. So where there is too much of carbon in the atmosphere, then it has, harmful impact. Now, we go to climate adaptation. We understand that we need to take action to prevent, further release of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, or to capture what is already in the atmosphere by way of reduction. However, it is also clear that we may not have all the resources to do this at a rate that allows us, protect us from the dangerous impact of climate change. And this is where adaptation comes in. That in the event that we are not able to immediately address, achieve a lot in terms of mitigation, and some of the, shocks and stresses of climate change begin to manifest, how do we make sure that we can recover from such impact? And that is what adaptation is saying, that can we adjust our current behavior, our current lifestyle, our current approaches to make sure that we are not, vulnerable to the damaging impact of climate change? And so, we look at different ways, whether it's on our land use, how you manage ocean and coastal zones, how we, use water, human settlement design, the kind of transportation that we use, the kind of energy sources that we depend on, and how we utilize energy in industry. So these are different areas where people have thought around how we manage climate impact, whether through mitigation or through adaptation. Now, so I encourage you to look at these links: Global Climate Action Portal. Then you also see that Nigeria has a climate action profile under this. And you see that we have what we call the climate action tracker that tracks how governments, take climate action in line with the Paris Agreement. So you should check all those out. Now, climate finance. We talk about climate action, whether it's mitigation or adaptation. Neither of these can be achieved without funding. And this is why when we look at the nationally determined contributions, which are sort of, government pledges on how they will cut down on emissions, in line with the Paris Agreement. So the nationally determined contributions. So we have two levels. So there is the, voluntary one where we say, oh, this is what we are willing to cut, right? And that is unconditional. So unconditional pledge, right? This is what we are willing to cut, based on our own development priorities. However, there is a conditional one that says that, okay, if we are going to cut unconditionally, maybe we are going to cut, 30% or 35%. Conditionally, we will cut 47% only if you provide finance to us, right? And there's a mechanism for that under the Paris Agreement, right? Such that developed economies who are understood to be the key contributors to this climate challenge are required to provide financing to less developed economies that are bearing the brunt, the loss and damages from climate impact. And therefore, the goal is that these developed economies are meant to provide at least $100 billion annually to all developing economies. But this is not the case. There's still a bit of challenge with respect to these. But overall, climate finance is a critical lever for driving climate action, whether mitigation or adaptation, because you need money, to do all of this. Even to plant trees, you require money. You buy the seedlings, right? You buy fertilizer, right? You transport people to the place, and you pay people to keep, maintaining the plant, protecting it from, goats, protecting it from different things. So there's still money, even at that level, at the communal level, there's still money involved. But at the broader level, so when we now come to climate finance, it is further, divided into mitigation finance based on the types of climate action. Because finance directed to mitigation action, okay? There's also adaptation finance focused on adaptation, right? Then there is also the finance that covers both, the dual objective finance. So it can be both for mitigation or adaptation, right? So when we look at this, based on the Paris Agreement and the UN, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, you see that there have been a number of financing mechanisms that have been established globally to support climate action. So you have the example of the Climate Environment Facility, the Green Climate Fund, the Special Climate Change Fund, the Least Developed Countries Fund, the Adaptation Fund. You can see clearly we have a separate adaptation fund. That tells you, the sort of classification of different types of climate finance, which means in certain areas, particularly in the advanced economies, a lot of what they are focusing on is mitigation finance to reduce emissions to the atmosphere, right? But for us, because we don't even have a lot of technology, industrialization is not at its best yet for us. A lot we are focusing on, particularly because in Africa, we are heavily dependent on rain-fed agriculture, right? And therefore, a lot around us, we have, weak infrastructure. So we need a lot more around adaptation than even mitigation.
Mitigation is also crucial because we are now starting to industrialize. But because for us to be able to withstand shocks and stresses of climate hazard, right? If there is flood, if there is drought, what happens? Do we have sufficient irrigation infrastructure to make sure that we don't suffer from food insecurities? Are we together? Do we have sufficient infrastructure to make sure that we don't suffer from water insecurity, right? And therefore, the question, even now, we are still struggling with a lot of this infrastructure. And so if climate change comes to it, it means it can worsen the situation for us, right? So it's crucial to think about, you know, the various mechanisms for driving climate action. So what you are seeing on the right-hand side of the screen, the chart, is giving you a world view of the global climate finance architecture, how it is structured. So you will see that there is the UNFCCC financing mechanism. This is where you see all of these funds that I mentioned earlier, which are to the right. Those are the ones driven by the UNFCCC. But there are also those other mechanism, finance options, that are not under the UNFCCC. And those are the other ones you see under that non-UNFCCC. You will see the names you are seeing from the top, the contributors. Did you see any, developing economies name there? What you are seeing are Australia, Canada, EU, which comprises of almost 30 different countries, right? France, Spain, Norway, Denmark. You would not see any developing economies there because of what I explained earlier. It's the commitment of these developed economies to support the emerging economies or underdeveloped economies, right? And so you just need to understand, this architecture to see, if you want to play at that level, what sort of financing you should be looking at, right? Or if you also support your own government, as your state government or your regional, development commissions, to mobilize climate finance, you understand where these financing are seated, whether under the UNFCCC financial mechanisms or under the non-UNFCCC financial mechanism. So that understanding is going to be helpful for you to, take any action when it comes to mobilizing climate change finance. Now, a critical one is what we call the loss and damage. Because look at the picture, you can see. This is a picture. Look at a house. This is someone's house. Can you see what climate change can do to our existing infrastructure? Look at the electricity pole. Imagine someone is in this house, and this electricity pole, the wires are now touching the water, and that person is inside the house. But now in Nigeria, at least we know that they always take the light when it is raining, or they don't do that in your own area. But it tells us the real impact. Now, look at the plant. Somebody's farm will be here. Someone who has gone to the farm every day. Look at what will happen to that person's farm. What will happen to that person's livelihood? Now, imagine there are children in this house. How will they go to school, right? Imagine you manage to buy furniture, you manage to buy electronics, and you keep them in this house. What will happen to these? Is the government going to come back and replace all your household furniture or electronics when they are damaged, right? Now, so this is a question that comes to mind when we think about loss and damage as a result of climate disasters. And this is why, there's what we now call the loss and damage fund. Because if Africa or other, developing economies must transition from the current business as usual model of running their economies based on fossil fuel, there's going to be a lot of losses in terms of livelihoods, jobs. And therefore, whether there are economic losses or non-economic losses, these need to be catered to. And this is why we have this conversation on loss and damage fund that some countries are already taking, advantages of. So I'm taking this very quickly because we can't cover everything in all details. So when we look at all these issues, climate finance, loss and damage, we understand the place of technologies, isn't it? Because for us to address climate mitigation, for us to address climate adaptation, technology plays a critical role. Now, the UNFCCC understand this. And that is why, the UNFCCC has a center and has established a network that should connect countries so that countries can learn from other peers on how they can adopt and embed technologies, to address their own climate development priorities. Now, these technologies range from simple technologies to more advanced technologies, as you have, people are now exploring hydrogen, carbon capture, storage, carbon removal technologies, green built environment, nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. So there are a lot of technologies, including AI. You now have sustainable fuel. So it's now different. Now you have sustainable aviation fuel, right? So that for people in the aviation sector, you have, different kind of fuel for people in the marine, so that they are not using, diesel. They are not using heavy fuel oil, right? So you now have different technologies coming up. These technologies are designed to help us address the concerns around climate mitigation and climate adaptation, right? And of course, artificial intelligence is not, taking a backseat. So for more details around the UN Climate Technology and Center Network, you can click on this link. It will take you so that you can read more about the UN Climate Technology Center and Network and see how you can leverage, a lot of the resources, a lot of the ideas for your own, work. Now, an important concept is also the concept of green jobs, right? If we say we should leave, now imagine, we stop producing oil and we stop exploring oil, what will happen to people who are working in oil servicing firm, oil production firm? What will happen to them, right? What will happen to all the people who are working in petrol filling stations, right? Look at how many we have all over the country. What will happen to people supplying products, producing products that are meant to support the use of cars? All dealers, all those of you that are car dealers, you have to change jobs, because the fossil fuel based, the diesel or petrol based engines will be completely abandoned. So if this is going to be the case, now that concern is there, that a lot of people will lose their jobs, whether in agriculture or different domains, is there any replacement for them under this, dispensation of climate, transition? And this is why the concept of green jobs come to say that, jobs that will contribute positively to the environment and also ensure that we don't continue to perpetuate social inequities and inequalities, right? And those are the jobs that we are now seeing a lot of people are now becoming professionals in renewable energy and energy efficiency, right? Minimizing waste, designing systems for minimizing waste and pollution in order to ensure circularity, right? So we've seen a lot of new products that are now coming out, designs and everything. So all of these are critical, aspects that that we are seeing this transition. So again, this is where financing is critical. Technologies are not going to come cheap, right? And therefore, we must understand the different ways for us to raise financing. Financing doesn't come cheap. There are different ways of raising finance. And we'll come to some of the examples of how, young people like yourselves have innovated ideas that allow them to tap into the, finance ecosystem. But before we get to that, let's take a look at the dimensions of different climate risks, because this can guide you as to how to position yourself if you want to tap into the climate finance ecosystem. You have to understand the risk that you're actually dealing with, the risk that you want to really solve, for, because that will guide the problem you want to solve, will determine where to look for money. If you're solving for problems that are focused on adaptation, then you have to know, entities that are focused on adaptation that you need to focus on. Then if you're solving problems relating to transition risk, right, mitigation risk and the likes, then you have to understand the nature of financing or where the ecosystem enablers are. So basically, we have two kinds of climate risk. So you've got the physical risk, and you have the transition risk, right? Now, the physical risks are further divided into two. You have the acute risk and the chronic risk. Now, just from their name, acute means something that happens, within a shorter time frame, but has very serious impact on you. Look at rain, right? Rain can happen and affect people. It can submerge people's houses, submerge people's vehicles, wash away your farm, wash away bridges, and lead to people's death, right? The same thing as wildfire. So these are acute risks that could come, right? Then you have chronic risk. Chronic are the guys that you don't notice them. They happen slowly. But that slow happening, it begins to erode the foundation of your economic and social stability. So you have an example of sea level rise, drought, right? They have a slow onset. You don't immediately notice them, but gradually they begin to weaken your capacity, to recover. And so, over time, you see sea level keep rising gradually until, before you know it, it starts inundating physical infrastructure, sweeping people away from their homes, making them homeless, making, roads inaccessible, disrupting supply chain and the likes, right? And drought. Before you know it, you just discover that, crop yield has dropped. A lot of crops are failed, right? Temperature rise can also either be acute or chronic because it can bring about onset of different kinds of diseases and pests, which can wipe a lot of yield and affect people significantly, right? So these are examples of physical risk. Then you have transition risks. Transition risks are risks that focus on, these areas, policy and legal risks, right? Because don't forget, we now have the Climate Change Act of 2021. It's going to impose a lot of requirements on businesses, government. How do we deal with this, right? Now, a lot of policies are out there, but how well are these policies implemented? If policies are poorly implemented, it's putting people's life in jeopardy. Isn't that the case? If your state government is meant to build, climate resilient infrastructure, and they are not doing that, and just imagine that a bridge is flooded or a bridge is broken, and then some people have emergency and they need to rush someone to the hospital, and then the bridge that they are meant to use is broken. There are states in the southeast, for example, where they have issues around gully erosion. A full, well-built road collapsed completely because of erosion. Now, it limits people access to different social and economic amenities. And this can have very serious impact on people's livelihoods and well-being. Now, there's technology risk. Different, as the Western economies or developed economies, where a lot of the technologies that we use are being designed, if they begin to shift to newer technologies, it means that the spare parts that you need to continue to repair the existing technology will now be phased out. Now you need to buy new technology to replace the one that you currently have. You need to train new set of people. You need to bring them in first to come and install and help operate, then train people before you can then take over. So these are the risks. This can disrupt your plan, operational plan, can disrupt your supply chain. It can render you uncompetitive and make you lose market share, right? And that comes to market risk, right? And there are issues around reputation risk. If you don't do things rightly, customer or community perception can impact on you, and it could have very serious impact on you overall. So, just a very quick look at what the situation is in Nigeria and Africa in terms of climate finance landscape. Now, again, as noted, there's meant to be climate finance flow from external parties, developed economies into emerging economies or developing economies. However, you cannot solely rely on external supply of finance or external finance flow. There's also the need to mobilize finance locally, internally, some very key policy decisions, that have to be made to ensure that you are directing funding to aspects that will ensure, that we are resilient against, climate vulnerabilities. And generally, you see that, Africa is meant to, utilize up to 2.8 trillion USD between 2020 and 2030. How long more do we have until 2030? But how much have we actually raised? You can see that we still have a long way to go, right? The climate finance flow, just imagine, this is just 52 billion. 52 billion is so small to 1 trillion, right? And guess what? What we need is what? We need 2.8 trillion. That's about 3 trillion. But we are not even raised since 2019. We've not even raised 100 billion. Now, 100 billion times 10 is what will give you 1 trillion. Are we together? So, put it into perspective, the very low rate of climate finance flow in Africa at this moment, right? And we have, even effort from private actors, development finance institutions. All of these have not really amounted to anything significant, and it presents a challenge. But even as bad as that looks, we've been able to see some, modest growth, in some ways. But there's the paradox. The paradox is that the countries that people need this finance the most don't get this finance. It's like I have some resources are the ones that are able to attract climate finance. So look at countries like Mali, Niger, Chad, Sudan, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Central African Republic. These countries, they require a lot of climate finance for them to, to have resilient economies. But they are not able to mobilize this. So the key countries that are mobilizing huge climate finance are Nigeria, the Eastern African countries, Kenya, South Africa, and a few of the Northern African countries. So there still remains a challenge that the climate finance is not actually flowing to the most vulnerable countries in Africa. So if you are focused on policies, if you're focused on planning, and you want to go up to Africa, these are some issues that you should think around, right? And of course, the same point that I rendered earlier. See, Southern Africa leads the way, in terms of the overall NDC cost. And that means because they are better industrialized, than other regions, in sub-Saharan Africa at least, right? But we see when you compare the ratio of the flow to the cost for implementing climate action, you see that it's huge. And key barriers are financial barrier, there are governance issues, corruption. Even when money flows, the money that flows in, is it used for the right purpose? So people are not also developing projects that can be funded, that are considered bankable. Then there are issues of skills, competency, and infrastructure deficit. So these are the things that are affecting proper climate finance flow on the continent. What about Nigeria? At this point, let me see if you have any question quickly, or reaction or comment before we go on. Comment, question, reaction. Good question, good luck. And if there are more affordable variants, that's why you are here. You are meant to be the one to champion the affordable variants, right? Tap into the knowledge of what exists, understand the constraints, and see how you can develop something, that will be a substitute to the, higher, more expensive version that currently exists, right? So again, it's one of the challenges that we have. Technologies are expensive, true. It takes time. Even look at solar, the solar PV. Imagine what it was like 10 years ago. But it's getting cheaper now, right? You now have solar generator, right? You now have solar lamps, solar home systems. So it will take some time before some of these technologies will get cheaper. But again, this is where our R&D is critical. If you're in the academics, we have electrical engineering department, we have, metallurgical engineering department, we have civil engineering department. What are we doing beyond just churning, research work that are staying in papers, that are not translating into visible, tangible technologies that will help solve our problems, right? Entities are spending money. Of course, it's good to focus on different sectors, creatives and the likes, but look at the amount of money people are spending on the creative sector. Whereas if climate change decimates us, what are we going to be creative about? right? So, we need to start thinking about, prioritizing. Okay, I'm being alerted. Time seems to be fast spent. So perhaps we have 5 or 10 minutes more, so I'll go a bit faster. So the point remains that, we must think. Look at Nigeria. You see the different sources of finance, multilateral sources, that is from development finance institutions like World Bank, right? Islamic Development Bank and the likes. That are bilateral, institutions, national development finance institutions. You see, overall, what you tend to see is that mitigation is more funded than adaptation, right? Mitigation is more funded by adaptation, and not all sectors are treated the same way, right? You tend to see that there's a lot more focus on the energy sector. And this is why you see a lot of talks around renewables and the likes, right? And you see, agriculture is also a very critical one because we all need to eat, right? And of course, export, right? But you see that waste remains very poorly funded across board. Industry still has a long way to go. Now, so these are areas that we must think around as to how can we bring our own intervention. Now, you can read more about the climate finance law. You see what we have in 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, you will see that, the climate finance law is actually still very small to the overall need, but what we are beginning to see is that there is improvement in terms of private sector or private actor participation in driving climate finance in Nigeria, right? And overall, this is typically, more prominent when you look at the energy sector, right? You look at the energy sector, you see a lot of, mobilization of funding for energy distribution in Nigeria. Now, so again, this is just to also further highlight, that when you look at mitigation and you look at adaptation, you have a lot more mobilized for mitigation and adaptation, and you can see the different sectors. Now these are what is tracked in Nigeria. It could be a lot more. So that's why we need to understand the efficiency in terms of data, right? Because there are things that we are doing because we don't have a structured system that allows us to track. We may actually not be showing the full picture here, but this is what is being tracked. And therefore, issues around, how do you also build system in your own regional development commissions or states that can allow for improved climate finance tracking, and that's something that you should think around. Now, key challenges. So I encourage you to read the Landscape of Climate Finance in Nigeria 2025. The link is there in the PowerPoint slide. So key challenges, we have issues of affordability, bankability of projects, capacity, skills and awareness, data and disclosure, limited data issues, easy access to technology, like you said. We must now start to think to re-engineer the way things are done. We can't continue to wait for external people to make things cheap for us. So this is where our industries, our academics, need to start thinking of how to bridge the gap between the town and the gown so that our university systems can be true sources of churning out, timely technologies because they get funding from industries, right? And of course, fiscal incentives, these are policy driven at your state. What fiscal incentives are there to drive climate action, at your state? How many states actually now have places where you have, electric vehicle charging ports infrastructure? If you don't have things like this, you are not even encouraging adoption of EVs or two-wheeler EVs in your ecosystem. So these are things for us to think around in terms of how to address these challenges. Now, how do we set the agenda? There are three important things for us to think about if we want to set an agenda for driving changes, for driving technology adoption, for driving, climate finance. So these three approaches are critical and they are nested, right? Oftentimes we hear about, government doing things in silos. But one important approach for setting agenda so that everyone's on the same page is the whole of government approach. That's the first one, whole of government approach. And government agencies, ministries, departments come together and work as a whole to ensure that there is appropriate coordination, right? And leverage of skills, resources, competencies, capacities across board to achieve this common goal, right? Now, beyond the government, it's also to the whole of the economy. Can the government not just do things in silos and involving only a pocket of their friends from the private sector? Can they ensure that the whole economy, because sometimes when they prioritize certain sectors, some sectors are completely left out. We can see the example of waste. The whole of the economy should be brought into perspective. Sometimes government just engage a lot of these big corporations, leaving the SMEs, the smaller players, the somewhat so-called inconsequential or informal actors out of the picture. Can government ensure all parts of the economy are engaged? That's the whole of the economy approach, right? And of course, the whole of securing inclusivity, shared responsibility for us to build collective resilience. So these three approaches are important for us to set the right agenda for driving change. So if you are thinking about setting agenda for driving change at any level, at any scale, you must think about these three approaches. The whole of government approach. Have all the government agencies, ministries, departments, have they been engaged? Have they involved? Are they aligned? Are they properly coordinated? Right? The whole of the economy, have all the sectors in your state, for example, if they're taking any actions, are they taking actions based on the coverage of all the key sectors within the economy? Right? If you're taking action on all of society, are you taking action considering all the diverse needs, perspective, rights, privileges, responsibilities, roles of all parties within the society? Unless you do this, your agenda setting may have been, founded on a very wrong foundation, a weak foundation. And what this would mean is that when critical insights are missing, you begin to notice gaps in implementation of policies down the line. And this is why things don't work, for the long term. So for Nigeria, we have a number of instruments that have now, that are now live for setting agenda, the climate policy strategies and action plan. Very recently, Nigeria also launched the Nigeria Carbon Market Activation Policy. So I encourage you to read. Then you can also visit this SDG Investor platform. It tells you some of the priority areas that finance can be mobilized for, right? In driving climate action in Nigeria. And you can read about the carbon market framework, understand where you can play a role. At your state level, a state like Lagos State is also starting its own carbon registry. What is your state doing? What kind of project can be implemented in your state that will contribute, that you can access the carbon market from? What industries in your state, will need to also participate in the carbon market? And how are you preparing for this in your state or your regional development commission? So you think about it, Nigeria is making wave. We're now working on our national carbon registry, which is now in place. But then, some work is still ongoing. You have the carbon market activation policy. But look at this digital payment ecosystem. This is where young people like yourself may come in. If we start to trade carbon instruments, if you start to trade carbon credit, whether as, businesses or, groups or, whatever frames, different kind of climate actors will have to participate in the climate carbon market. If you read the carbon market activation policy, you see the diverse stakeholders that will participate in the carbon market. Where do you want to play? Which of these stakeholder groups do you belong, right? And this is one of the ways that we can drive climate, finance to develop projects locally, because the Climate Change Act of 2021 requires that there's a climate change fund that would need to be implemented and funded to ensure that we can drive climate action projects, weather mitigation or adaptation in Nigeria. So you think about this. So very quickly, and this will be the last part, just to give a snippet of how we can begin to ideate solutions. We can borrow brilliance and leverage insight from what other people have done, right, in other climes. Technologies. When we think about technologies, we should not just think technologies in terms of phones or the usual things that we know. Technologies can be thought of in three ways, three dimensions: the hardware, the software, and the hardware, right? The hardware, the software, and the hardware. Now, very quickly, the hardware are the physical things, the different machines, equipment that we can design and bring to reduce energy consumption, to influence a lot of mitigation and adaptation objectives. Now there's the soft technology, which are processes, knowledge, skills, resources that help shape our mind, particularly in the academia, in industries, so that we can, revamp, optimize process, change the way systems, and we can operate in more efficient and more responsible and resilient manner, right? But then there's also hardware, how we can function more effectively at institutional levels. Because a whole lot of us, we now have many NGOs. Everybody just wants to pursue their own objectives. Oh, I have to be the founder, executive director of the. Why can't you partner if you have common objectives, right? And have very solid base, have very strong institutional governance framework, and and direct your resources and capacities to achieving the same objectives, rather than everyone seeking individual glories. So these are things that we can think of, right? There are technologies focused on Internet of Things. A California-based company are beginning to embed Internet of Things, to detect wildfires, pass information to fire professionals, emergency services. So we can think about these for adaptation, right? There's augmented reality. You can design a center where, people can learn about climate change, the climate impact in different communities, far flung communities that people cannot travel to. But for them to understand, in schools, for example, you could even create a climate lab, do this experience center where young children can come and have almost surreal interaction with environment where you have flood. They can see examples of flood. It creates vivid image in their minds and gives them the mind to start thinking about potential solutions, because you never can tell, how you can inspire young people to come up with ideas that can solve a lot of problems, right? So these are great technology. We now have drones for climate adaptation. We have this young man who now uses drone a lot for a lot of agricultural related activities, right? So drones can also help in areas of security that people are afraid to go out, because, if there are drone services that could help them, spray fertilizer, spray insecticide and the likes, capture a lot of things in terms of soil health, yield on their farms without people physically being present. It also serves as measures for, protecting people from danger, when, there are issues for them to get to the, unless someone decides to shoot down your drone, but it would still serve a lot of purpose in getting you the required information without being physically present on site. AI, whether in terms of generating knowledge, understanding comparison of different technologies, understanding issues at different scales, AI can also be very beneficial. This is a climate innovation technology innovation academy. These are examples of solutions that have been built by young people like yourselves, right? Go through these resources, see how these are done in different countries. So if this is not existing yet in Nigeria, this is something that you can bring to Nigeria, for example. If this is not existing in your state, this is something you can bring to your state, right? So these are things that young people like yourselves have actually thought about in different ecosystems. And, it doesn't mean that someone is doing it, that you cannot do it better. Now, is it that you do something different, or you do it differently, or do it better? Don't forget, these are 3 strategies for improving on existing solution universe. Do something different that no one else has done. Do it differently if someone has done it, right? Then do it better than whatever is available in the ecosystem. So these are further examples, right? Different, ways for addressing different climate challenges, right? And then, if you want to raise finance, these are programs you can participate in that prepares you for the financing ecosystem. I hope that this has been useful. I've had to rush through the last few slides, but I hope that you get the gist of, climate finance and technologies, and how to begin to set agenda for change. Thank you. Apologies that I took more than the time required. I hope that you find this useful.
All right. Thank you so much for this deep and enlightening session. This has been, we could take more time. We could have taken more time, but I think it's worth it, because this knowledge and insights that you've just passed to us is so valuable. It's very valuable, and we appreciate you, sir. So now we'll be moving on to questions and answers. So I'm sure a lot of us have questions. So I think some questions are in the chat box already. So
Okay,
I'll be reading.
let me answer one of those questions in the chat box while others are sharing theirs. Interesting questions about the use of AI among technology. You mentioned the use of AI. Is the use of AI for sustainable development not a means of creating future droughts? AI is greatly dependent on water for its function. And if this water should be used for agriculture and its lives is deviated for AI use, won't that be a future climate problem waiting to happen? Now, that's an interesting question. And, you have to understand that as humans, and this is where, we think about how we go about providing solutions to existing problems without creating new sort of problems by trying to solve the existing problems. So this is where issues around water circularity or circular economics come, right? So you cannot say because, when we begin to use water, when we begin to use water for AI systems, and when you say water, I think we need to clarify that how does the AI ecosystem work? They need data centers, right? In these data centers, does data center consume water? So that's the question. Or perhaps you're looking at the value chain, the production chain itself. So you think about it that we have water in abundance in nature. The water we are talking about here, in terms of water scarcity, is the potable water that we can use for our immediate, needs. Don't forget that we have abundance of water in ocean, right? So if we actually need water to cool systems that support our AI infrastructure, we can desalinize water from the ocean, right? And when we desalinize the water from the ocean, we will create, and this is technology that's already happening, we will create a loop so that the average loss of water from the system is going to reduce. There's a cooling mechanism. In fact, if you have been to some power plants, you will see that there's a mechanism for running water to a certain height so that when that water is run through, a height up there, the hot water that goes up, by the time it's coming down, it's cooled down because the heat will be absorbed. The heat differential between the lower floor, the lower region of the environment and the atmosphere. When hot water gets to the atmosphere, that heat is extracted, and so by the time the water is coming down, it's cooled. So the net loss of water is reduced in such systems. And so the worry about whether we have sufficient water, don't also forget that we have glaciers, ice regions that are folded such that if we melt those water, it's going to increase the overall volume of water that is available in our oceans and seas. So it's not as though, we would not have, sufficient water, on the Earth's surface. But it is the form of that water that may be a challenge, and the cost of ensuring that we have the amount of water, in the form that we need it for our economic or domestic activities. But these can actually be addressed by technology, and this is why we must think about innovation, right? Because imagine if people have thought about the amount of ground that a single aeroplane will take, or how aeroplane will contribute to emission in the atmosphere. Do you think anybody will travel anywhere? Do you think we'll have the train? We'll have aeroplane? Do you think we'll have ships? So all we need to think about is how do we ensure that we operate a sustainable system? So AI is not going to cause, these same arguments have actually been presented when it came to biofuel as well. There's that argument as, should we use our land to cultivate biofuel, the plants that we use for biofuel, or to cultivate food, right? But the question remains that as humans, we have that capacity to continue to rethink processes, systems that enable us to innovate in a way that ensures that we don't consume the earth resources in an unsustainable manner, and that when we do consume resources, we ensure that we have a sustainable way of consuming these resources in a way that would not lead to future challenges for us. So a closed loop system can be designed. In fact, a lot of wastewater can be trapped. Water from septic tanks, water from different sources, right? Sewage treatment plants, the water that we are using to do a whole lot of things can actually be cleaned up and be used for cooling instead of using fresh water for cooling, right? So these are ways that, wastewater can actually be treated for cooling of AI infrastructure rather than using fresh water, so that it doesn't compete with available water resources that we use for, normal manufacturing industrial activities as well as domestic use. I hope this clarifies, right? Because even for agriculture, water runoff, there are retention ponds that can be designed to collect water. There can also be rainwater harvesting that is also done, so that this water, when collected, they can be treated and then be reused and reused over time. So the net loss will be minimal. And don't forget, there's also going to be rain. So this can continue to recharge the underground aquifer and ensure that the overall volume of water available, meets our need. But again, like you pointed out, this would mean that we'll be deliberate as to how we utilize water resources and ensure that, we have a closed loop system that continue to minimize the abstraction of water from fresh sources, while we are trying to use the gray water that have come from processes and production activities. I hope that answers your question. Okay, that's perhaps the only question we have.
Yes, I was going to say that because our time is fast spent, and we are like almost 50 minutes past the time. But I believe strongly that you've done justice to his questions, because you really expanded on it. And even me personally, I was able to learn one or two things from there. So yeah, I think that I think that is kind of related to cloud seeding, form of
Yeah,
what's
there's
it
also,
called? Artificial watering, right? Yeah,
correct.
yeah. So cloud seeding. So what I will encourage participants to do is you can read more on some of these things. The slides will be shared with you. I'm sure Abbas would not hesitate to share his slide. So I would like to say a big thank you to everyone for joining this session this afternoon. It's been a beautiful one, quite engaging, interactive, and enlightening as well. And I'm sure that every participant has I've learned one or two things from this session. So going forward, we look forward to the next couple of weeks. We are just 2 weeks into the boot camp, and 2 weeks to go. So for the remaining weeks, for the sorry, for the remaining weeks, I would like to say that grouping of participants will be done, and every participant should look into their email in a couple of days, as you would know what group you are in. As you were told during your onboarding session, you'll be grouped into 5 groups. That's 25 participants each. For some reason, some of the participants had the issue joining this session. So this afternoon, so that's why we have the very low number. This is the lowest we've had so far, and I hope to see more engagement in the couple of weeks. Thank you so much once again, Abbas, for that beautiful session. Thank you to all participants. The attendance link has been shared in the chat box. You can fill it and also share your reflection from the session. And we look forward to more beautiful sessions in the coming week. So right about now, I'd like us to put on our camera, and then we'll take the final pictures for this session. Thank you all so much. So Yetunde or Samidin, could you please help with taking the group photograph?
Cameras. Yes. So on the count of 3, so let's say cheese. 1, 2, 3. All right. Beautiful faces, and that's it. Thank you. Over
Thanks
to you,
everyone.
Evangeline.
Bye. Bye everyone.